Welcome to February 1st, 2024. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show exclusively on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman. You can follow me on the X at Eric Balkman. Of course, you know me from the FFPC, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. Joined tonight by the incomparable, the amazing, the talented Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros. You follow him on the X at Andrew Erickson _ at Fantasy Pros, at Fantasy Pros on the X, fantasypros.com. Andrew, welcome in. Thanks so much for doing the show tonight. This is a weird time to do fantasy, right? The FFPC launched the Never Too Early tournaments. Obviously, we got dynasty stuff going on, but I feel like you guys in the industry, like toiling and doing everything you can. This is sort of your downtime, right? And then I look at your Fantasy Pros posts and everything you're producing there. This is not your downtime at all. You're churning out great content, man.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep up with my boys in Mobile, Alabama. Debro,
Yes.
Thor Nystrom. They're doing all the Senior Bowl coverage that you could possibly ask for. So I'm here holding down the fort, putting out 2024 NFL rankings as they look and dive into the prospects. I know I'm going to be catching up on the prospects soon as well. But no, I mean, the grind really doesn't stop with the fact that you can draft teams for next year, and we still have one more game left to go in
Yes.
the 2023 season is kind of bonkers. So I am resisting to just dive into drafts just yet. You know, if I was doing a draft, my fiance asked me, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm drafting a fantasy football team." She's like, "Wait, isn't it February?" It's like, might be a bit of a stretch for me. So I'm holding off on drafting for right now, but the rankings are coming hot and heavy.
Well, I think that's what's great about tonight's show. And by the way, on tonight's show, we're not only going to get into the stuff going around the NFL right now, some breaking news, actually, we'll get into in a little bit. But TJ Hawkinson's surgery, Dak Prescott, the comments that we heard from Jerry Jones, we're going to get into that, as well as Art Rooney's comments on the new Steelers offensive coordinator, that and more. Plus, we're going to find out where Andrew stands on certain players like Chuba Hubbard, Jalen Waddle, Kyle Pitts, and more. And then the second half of the show tonight, which will go until 9 o'clock Eastern time, will be exclusively dedicated to one of the most lengthy, one of the most thorough, one of the most informative articles you will find in the fantasy interwebs, the Fantasy Football Forecast on Fantasy Pros. We're going to spend a full hour on this. That's how much there is. And quite frankly, people, I was going through this earlier today. We can't get through all of it. Like, you're going to have to go to fantasypros.com and read the rest of it. We're going to get through as much of it as we can, as Andrew takes us through literally every single team that is still, that is not alive anymore in 2023. So basically, Chiefs, Niners, we probably won't get into it tonight, but literally every other team, we're going to get into that on the show tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros joining me tonight. Go to myffpc.com to play the Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments. These two tournaments are going all the way up until the start of the NFL draft. They conclude on April 25th. They're both going to follow best ball slim rules, no kickers, no defenses, 20 round draft, 14-week regular season, single week elimination in the playoffs from weeks 15 through 17. We crown a champion at the end of week 17. Drafts are available with a 30-second clock, a 60-second clock, 2-hour clock, and 6-hour clock. Take your shot at either a $25,000 or a $10,000 prize. And if you're worried, like, oh, well, bulky, I don't want to do that because somebody's going to chime in, somebody's going to draft a team in August or September, and they're going to trump me. No. The registration cuts off in late April. Everybody's on on the same playing field, so you don't have to worry about somebody getting in late and drafting this monolithic team. That's not going to happen. myffpc.com is where to go. Tyler Soto is our producer, the man behind the glass tonight. We thank him for all of his work. And Andrew, let's kick things off in Minnesota, the Midwestern part of the country. TJ Hawkinson, this past Monday, goes under the knife to get surgery on his torn ACL. This, according to Adam Schefter from ESPN. Now, the aspect I want to bring up, I've been looking at this from the FFPC side of things in the Never Too Early Best Ball tournament, and I feel like TJ Hawkinson's status and his production in 2024 is going to be I think it's being overrated right now based on how people are drafting this guy. If you look at the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament ADP, shout out to Fantasy Mojo at Fantasy Mojo on Twitter, fantasymojo.com. Darren Armani, the godfather of the FFPC Pros versus Joe's tourney. You will look at his data and you will find out that Hawkinson currently is going as the tight end 10. He's being drafted as a starting tight end at the 6'10". Again, tight end premium format, so he's going to be going a little bit higher. You can get him at the end of the 6th round. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew. This is a guy who may not play in the 2024 season based on how Minnesota's season is going at the end of the season when Hawkinson's ready to come back. You're drafting him in a single-digit round at the end of the 6th round. To me, this seems too high. Can you get me on the same page as you, or tell me, like, look, you're way off base? How do you feel about Hawkinson going as a late 6th round pick right now in FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball drafts?
I don't mind that price tag for Hawkinson, to be totally honest. I mean, we think we know a lot about these injuries and projecting them out, but they're hard to project. And honestly, what I've kind of found works best is to kind of go against the field. So if the field is afraid of Hawkinson that coming back from this injury, then I would want to be a buyer of him. Whereas if the market is really bullish on him coming back, it's more advantageous for me to just go in the opposite direction, because injuries can go in so many different ways. Like Javonte Williams, Breece Hall, like these injuries for guys coming off of season-long injuries can be so complex, and how they return is totally up in the air. But what I do know is, like, when Hawkinson comes back, he's going to be a guy that produces later on during the season, not necessarily the beginning of the season. So you already know when you're building your roster how to build it in a way where, okay, I need to make sure that I am replacing that tight end early production in some way, shape, or form. And what position is the best to wait on is tight end. Like, chances are you're going to draft one of these tight ends earlier than Hawkinson. That's probably going to miss a ton of games anyway. So at least you can go into the season knowing, hey, I know Hawkinson might miss the first month of the year. I mean, I don't think he's going to miss the entire season. Like, I just don't think that, based on usually that 9-month range is kind of when we project him to come back. So if he misses the first month, I mean, Chris Godwin tore his ACL in December and then came back the next year and played week 1. So it really depends on the player. And I think at tight end 10 in a tight end premium league, where if Hawkinson comes back, he can put up top 5 numbers, and you're pairing that with the rest of your roster, I think that's a fair price just based on the information at hand.
Okay, so knowing that, and knowing that in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, where registration will cut off prior to the NFL draft starting, so you're looking at the end of April, like nobody's getting an advantage after that. You're looking at Hawkinson going off as the tight end 10. Like, this is something that you would be buying from now for the next 2 months because of the potential boon it could give you towards the end of the season. Or maybe rephrase the question. When do you think, knowing what you know right now, what week does Hawkinson come back? Your best guess, Andrew.
I would probably say sometime in October. That's what I would probably.
Then he's a fantastic buy. He's a fantastic buy at that point, right?
Yeah, I think so. Especially with tight end, where tight ends get hurt so much anyway. Like, tight ends miss so much time, and all you know is with Hawkinson, okay, if he's like falling into that more late round territory, when he's on the field, you know he's going to produce. Like, I'm not concerned about him coming back. Yeah. We've seen guys come back from ACL injuries and they're fine. Like, he's a tight end. He doesn't need like a ton of speed necessarily. He plays in a good offense. So again, knowing the information beforehand, I think, is helpful, because you know how to then construct your roster. So make sure you draft a bunch of Jordan Addison, because who's going to pick up the slack while Hawkinson's out? Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson. Like, so you can build your roster knowing already, okay, how can I better attack this? Knowing I'll get Hawkinson down the stretch. I need some more early season production for my other tight ends I take later on.
Let me ask you this. So in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, the FFPC, Addison is going literally on average 4 picks ahead of Hawkinson. So they're almost going at the exact same point. Is there a way for players who are drafting right now to exploit either Hawkinson or Addison, knowing what you just said right now? Does Hawkinson make the better pick, or is Addison actually a sleeper at that point?
I mean, I think they're both good picks, because it's essentially the fact that you said they were going right next to each other is essentially a hedge. Like, that's exactly what the market's doing, is it's hedging its bets, because they don't really know what Hawkinson's going to come back. But what we do know is if he's delayed in any way, that's going to be a boon for Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison was super productive, even with Justin Jefferson not on the field, and that's what we're going to expect to happen. Like, those targets are going to go to Addison in this offense. And there's also the question marks about Kirk Cousins, but I expect him to come back too. So, yeah, I think this is an opportunity to buy on this Vikings offense because of all the question marks, because that's how you win ultimately. Like, because if this offense comes back out and exceeds expectations, like, that's how you win these best ball tournaments. It's because I was in on the Texans. Like, those are the reasons. So if you're in on the Vikings while the prices are cheap, while people are scared and they end up being fine, there you go.
What about you just mentioned Cousins. If you are drafting right now, do you draft Vikings based on the fact that, not the fact, but the hunch that you think Cousins is going to be the starting quarterback week 1 for the Vikings?
I think so. I think that's where he's going to end up going. He's talked about wanting to play there. I can't really just like, it's hard for me to picture him like in another uniform, to be totally honest. Like, I'm just like thinking in my mind, like, is he really going to go to like one of these other teams where he doesn't know anybody coming off a major injury? Like, he's someone, again, this guy shops at Kohl's. Like, he likes to be comfortable. He likes comfort. And what's more comfortable than going back to the same situation with the same coaching staff, with the same medical staff that's been working through his injury? Like, the last thing I want to do is like rehabbing this injury, and then I have a whole new medical staff that's now attending to my knee or my Achilles that I tore. I want consistency. I want comfort, and that's Kirk Cousins to me. So I think he'll be back under center for the Vikings.
Let's talk about more comfort going into Dallas. So Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, according to Pro Football Talk, told reporters at the Senior Bowl this week that he believes Dak Prescott, quote, has room for improvement. Now, before we go all crazy on this quote, Jones talked about Dak Prescott sort of pumping him up rather than a negative thing. He said, quote, it's a big plus when you've been playing the game 7 years and you, by assessment, have some room to get better at. To me, and I think to other people, this is a clear statement that will deflect blame from Mike McCarthy's shortcomings in the playoffs. The fact that he's bringing Mike McCarthy back and putting some of the onus on Dak Prescott, some of the onus on the coaching under Mike McCarthy. Dak Prescott, 4,500 yards in 2023, 36 touchdowns, just 9 picks, and he led the NFL in interceptions the previous year. If you look at the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament right now, Dak Prescott, Andrew Erickson, quarterback 7 at the 704. He is going behind Stroud. He's going behind Richardson. We'll get to Richardson more later on in the program. Obviously, going behind Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and so on and so on. Prescott, if you look at him in this tournament, going at the early to mid 7th round, does he represent a buy for you at this standpoint? And I think we can throw in the fact that the running game is unknown, and the fact that they got blitzed by the Packers in the first round of the playoffs here. I wonder if Prescott is a good buy for fantasy owners in 2024 at this point.
Well, I mean, he was definitely a good buy last year based on his ending finish. Like, he was someone that was going constantly like outside the top 12 quarterbacks and obviously put together an impressive season. But I think that Jerry Jones is talking about how inconsistent Dak Prescott is at times. And it's not even just like from a year-to-year basis. I mean, we were talking about Dak. Like, the reason he was going so late last year is because he was QB 18 in 2022. Like, he was really bad. Again, the interceptions, yeah, that was a problem, but the touchdowns were not there. And we got to realize, look, if Tony Pollard scores like even like 6 or 7 of the touchdowns he should have scored, like, that hurts Dak Prescott. Like, the reason Dak so many touchdowns is because Tony Pollard could never find the end zone. So that naturally boosted up Dak, boosted up Jake Ferguson, boosted up CeeDee Lamb. That's why this team led the NFL in red zone passing attempts. Jake Ferguson, first in tight end red zone attempt, or red zone targets. CeeDee Lamb, first in red zone targets among wide receivers. Like, this team was always in the red zone, and they're always throwing the ball because they could never run it. So for me, I think that this is getting Dak more around his ceiling. And for me, quarterback is always about looking for the best price. And it's interesting because one of the names I don't think you mentioned that's going before Dak Prescott that I have ranked ahead of Dak Prescott confidently is Joe Burrow. So that's the player that I would rather buy on coming off a year. Like, we were talking before we hopped on the show, be like, hey, Andrew, how did your teams do this year? Well, I drafted a lot of Bengals. And so, yeah, my seasons didn't really work out that well. But for me, it's like, I don't think my process was wrong. I mean, Joe Burrow got hurt. And that's what happens when your quarterback gets hurt. The entire season flames out. But why would I not go right back to Joe Burrow now that he's just significantly cheaper? Like, what's changed? Maybe he loses T. Higgins. Maybe it's not. But, I mean, it's Zach Taylor's still there. Jamar Chase is still there. Joe Burrow is still the quarterback. Like, he's the engine that drives this offense. So I'm going to buy Joe Burrow because one of the things that I learned about with quarterbacks in terms of projecting guys that bust the next year is you want to fade the guys with the super high touchdown passing efficiency. Like, those things are hard to replicate year over year. So for me, Dak Prescott, would you say he led the NFL in passing touchdowns?
Yeah.
It's just really hard to do in back-to-back years. You know, the year before, you know who did it? Patrick Mahomes. Did anybody like drafting Patrick Mahomes? No, it didn't work out. So I'm going to take the cheaper guy with Joe Burrow.
Real quick on the Burrow standpoint, because I don't think I have this on the show rundown. Gun to your head. T. Higgins, a Bengal in 2024, yes or no?
I'd say no.
Now, knowing that you believe that's a no. Well, let me ask you this before we go any further. Tyler Boyd, Cincinnati Bengal in 2024, yes or no?
I'm going to say no there as well.
Okay, so you say no there as well. So the fact that Burrow is losing his number 2 and number 3 targets this year, you're still a believer in him. We'll get into Mixon later on. Don't talk about it now because we want to give the viewers something to whet their appetites for. But your thoughts on why you are still a believer in Burrow when he's going to have Chase and then some unknowns after that?
Well, I mean, who did Dak have this year that was good besides Lamb? He had a tight end.
Ferguson. That would be it.
But it was a tight end. So it's like, can we get tight end production? I mean, is Jake Ferguson the reason why Dak Prescott was good? No. Like, Dak Prescott was fueling Jake Ferguson. So whether they sign somebody, again, there are free agents they can get. I mean, hell, they could bring Gabe Davis in for the Bengals, get a cheap discount for Joe Burrow, just chuck it deep to Gabe Davis for touchdowns. Like, so I again, Joe Burrow is the straw that stirs the drink there in the Bengals offense. And I think that he's going to get it done.
Fair enough. Can't disagree with any of that. That said, Andrew, and let me ask you this, and we can, anybody who's interested, you can check out your wide receiver tiers, wide receiver rankings column at fantasypros.com. That said, knowing what you have just said about the Cowboys, comparing it to the Bengals situation, what receiver would you take in drafts over Jamar Chase in 2024?
No receivers.
Chase is your number 1 receiver. Yes, he's your number one receiver.
He was number 1 last year, and then his quarterback got hurt, and then that's why he did bad. But no one was, oh my God, you have Jamar Chase as your number 1 receiver. Like, what's wrong with you? It's like, no, like, it was all there for the taking, and his quarterback got hurt. That's what happened. So I'm just going right back to it, especially if we look at, if Higgins is gone, where are the targets going to go? They're going to go to Jamar Chase. And despite Jamar Chase playing underperforming last year, you know what he still did? Still saw a ton of red zone targets. You know what the easiest way to find the most common thing you ever find in the number 1 wide receiver every single year is they always lead the NFL in red zone targets every single time. And Jamar Chase has had a insane red zone targets per game the last 2 seasons. Like, who's going to take red zone targets away from him? Again, what if Mixon's gone? They're not going to be scoring rushing touchdowns. Chase Brown? No, it's going to be Jamar Chase. It's the Jamar Chase show. So, yeah, I'm going to take Jamar Chase. I'm going to take the guy that I think is going to lead the NFL red zone targets this next year, not draft the guy, Lamb, who led it last year. I'm not living it. I'm not a prisoner of the moment, Eric. I'm looking ahead to future.
Right. And I think that's important, too, because we are, for anybody who's drafting in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, you're going to have, essentially a little bit less than 3 months here. You don't have to necessarily go with the guy who crushed it in 2023. You have to go with the guy who's going to crush it in 2024. According to Andrew Erickson, a guy much smarter than me, is saying Jamar Chase, and I can't disagree with him. Now, let me ask you this, Andrew. The viewers want to know, where are you located doing all your Fantasy Pros work?
Right outside of Boston.
Outside of Boston, which makes you a what fan?
I am a Patriots fan.
You're a Patriots fan. If there's one team in the NFL that you dislike more than any other, what team is it?
It's probably the Jets.
It's the Jets. Now, I don't know if you're playing into this or not, but you're doing a great job if you are. A bombshell report from Diana Rossini. And I can't remember the other reporter. My apologies, but go check it out, theathletic.com. The Jets, it was a situation of, and by the way, I can't remember if I told you this. I'm like 2 Jordan Love Hail Mary throws southwest of Lambeau Field. So I am a Packers guy. reading this, and I was listening to a local radio guy today who is based out of Milwaukee. He said reading this Rossini report on The Athletic was like Rodgers haters porn. Like that's how sexy it was reading this. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of stuff in here in this report that surprised me. There was a lot of stuff that didn't surprise me. But according to The Athletic, the Jets are going to keep Nathaniel Hackett as OC in 2024, but they are, quote, seeking a more collaborative play calling process, which to me reads, Robert Saleh does not necessarily fully believe in Nathaniel Hackett. Now, he did not adapt the Jets offense enough. And maybe I don't want to put it all on Hackett because maybe Zach Wilson just stinks. And maybe the offensive line just stinks. Like there's never just one thing, as Matt LaFleur says all the time. It's never just one thing. And it probably may not be just one thing with the Jets. But Hackett, who's like best buddies with Aaron Rodgers, his handpicked offensive coordinator for New York, is going to be coming back to the Jets. And according to this report, he was criticized for his stewardship of the offense, and multiple coaches and players describing him as lacking in attention to detail. Garrett Wilson, a guy who is going, and we'll talk about this in a second, Garrett Wilson, who is going as the wide receiver 8 at the 203 in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament with the FFPC, said, quote, we've got to make adjustments in the game. We've got to do things to counter what we're getting. The Jets in 2023 last in the NFL in third down conversions, last in the NFL in red zone offense, last in the NFL in total offensive EPA, 31st in total yards, 30th in offensive points per game, 30th in passing yards. They scored 18 offensive touchdowns in 17 games. All this to me, don't talk about Breece Hall yet, Andrew. We're going to get into that later. All this to me suggests don't draft Jets. They're awful. Stay away. Stay away. But Rodgers coming back. He's had a good relationship with Hackett. They're trying to stay the course in New York. Let's talk about this strictly from a Garrett Wilson standpoint here. Garrett Wilson, 203, wide receiver 8. Are you on board or are you off board with this player, knowing Rodgers should be the quarterback in New York next year?
I think it's a little pricey, but I mean, I have him wide receiver 10 in my rankings, and he's in an area where there's a couple guys with some other question marks. But I mean, there's no doubt with his talent, the usage that he got last year. I mean, you check any type of air yards, target share, weighted opportunity, like he's number one in like almost every category. But there's just no production to follow. Like basically, he did everything except score fantasy points for you because of, again, how bad the offense was. And you know, he had 3 touchdowns, I think, out of the 18 that the Jets scored altogether. So it's him. And with Breece Hall, it's like, it's so easy to tell how this offense can cook. It's just a matter of getting them into the end zone. And I think that with Rodgers, just 75% of Aaron Rodgers, like, can at least get the ball into the end zone, like more often than this team did at all times last year. And again, it's like, it's that, what's that phrase where everyone has a plan to get punched in the mouth. And that was
Mike Tyson.
That was the Jets basically after Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles. Like they got punched in the mouth and they're like, well, now we don't have a plan anymore. Like that was their plan. It's like Rodgers is going to run the offense and Hackett will just kind of be his guy. And the minute that he went down, it's like, well, we're screwed. Like unlike all the other teams, like the Vikings, for example, like they just kept trying different things with different quarterbacks and things worked until they didn't. And they did something else. They pivoted. At least they had a plan, it seemed like, to try to adjust on the fly, where the Jets were like, I guess we'll play this quarterback this week and see what happens. Like, so I think that is stock up for those guys. I would draft Garrett Wilson as a wide receiver 8. I loved him coming out of Ohio State, and I think that he's still scratching the surface on what he can do. I think that he has a Justin Jefferson-esque skill level, just a matter of putting him with the right quarterback for him to really be unlocked. And it's a shame that we just didn't get to see it all with Rodgers last year, but I think Rodgers has a lot to improve. I don't know how well he's going to do for a fantasy perspective just because he doesn't run anymore. But, I mean, even if he throws like 25 touchdowns, like that's the Jets are begging for that. I would love 25 touchdowns with Rodgers.
Is there something to be said for the fact that Wilson – okay, so knowing the quarterback situation last year with Zach Wilson and Tim Boyle down the stretch, Andrew, how would you grade Garrett Wilson's performance knowing those are his quarterbacks? A, B, C, D, E, F.
I
Not
would
E.
probably
A,
give
B, C,
him
D, F.
I would probably give him a B.
Okay.
One thing I did notice that I thought was kind of interesting when I was looking at, one of the things I look at receivers specifically is yards after the catch, because that's agnostic of the quarterback play. So it's like, all right, we're taking the quarterback out of it. And he was someone that graded pretty well out of Ohio State as Yak. His rookie year, he's good after the catch. But this past year, he wasn't really that good after the catch. So to me, it's like, I mean, maybe the guy just wasn't busting his ass as much because he's like, dude, like, we're getting killed. Like, what's the point of me trying to break all these tackles to rip off a big play? Like, what's the point? So I get that. So that's why I give him a B. But at the same time, like, I mean, you just look at the targets versus the receptions numbers. He had over 160 targets. He didn't get 100 catches. Like, he was the only player that saw that many targets that didn't get to 100 catches because of just air balls and, balls that are not in his stratosphere for him to catch. So that's going to be frustrating, especially for a young player. Like, I'm not saying he's immature, but like, he's someone that's going to mature. There's no one else in that locker room. I mean, Randall Cobb, like, who is he leaning on for guidance as a second-year player that's supposed to be, oh, now you're a leader in this locker room? It's like, leader of what? like, what am I leading here exactly? So, yeah, I think that, again, I think the Jets players, especially these guys, the top guys like Wilson and Breece Hall, even though statistically they have some highlights from last year, I think they all know that they have a lot to prove in this upcoming season.
You give Garrett Wilson a B, which I think is fair. And I think of it from the standpoint of, I remember in a lot of leagues I was drafting last year, this guy, Garrett Wilson, was going at the end of the first, early second, or mid-second. And the fact that, everything fell apart for the Jets, and the only thing we know of concretely right now is that Rodgers is coming back. There's not really a discount with Wilson. He's still wide receiver 8. He's still going at the 203. I'm wondering if you view that as a buy opportunity, or if that's just, hey, man, that's where I think he's going to end up this year, so I'm on board with him at that point. After a year, what I saw in 2023, I would think that there would be a buying opportunity. I'm not really seeing it with Wilson. I feel like you're drafting him at his, I don't want to say ceiling, but you're drafting him at what most people project him to do. And at that point, are you better off looking somewhere else given the risk factor? I don't know. Your thoughts?
Well, I guess for me, it's like last year was the risk factor. Like that was it. Like, we saw him play another season without a quarterback, and you know what you got. So I guess the one saving grace from last year was it happened so early that, like, you kind of knew what you were dealing with. Like, the minute that you already had Garrett Wilson on your fantasy team, like, you already knew, like, oh, well, this is bad now. Like,
right.
So you weren't expecting him to just like light up the entire year going in. Obviously, it changed after the injury happened, but I think it's just really like kind of like with the Bengals. Again, obviously, like you pointed out, like, you're getting a better discount on Bengals players than Jets, but it's because those guys are so good, and Aaron Rodgers being under center matters so much. I think the market is on point, like ranking guys like Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall respective to what the expectation should be with Aaron Rodgers under center.
I think that makes sense. And I think that the fact that the high stakes players have not backed off Garrett Wilson gives you a clue to, as we hit drafting this summer, in the next couple months, there's not going to be a discount on Garrett Wilson. You either want him or you don't moving forward. Now, there was a lot of backlash with Arthur Smith last year. He has Drake London, he has Kyle Pitts, he has Bijan Robinson, and I don't think anybody was thrilled to own any of those guys in 2023. Smith gets fired in Atlanta, and he doesn't collect his unemployment checks for very long, because now he is hired as the Steelers offensive coordinator for 2024. According to ESPN.com, Art Rooney II said that the Steelers offense will have Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren as the foundation of the point of attack for 2024. Both of them had strong finishes to the end of the season. And obviously Arthur Smith has, I don't want to put you out. This is just my personal feelings. He has an unnatural attraction to the running game in the NFL. Art Rooney, quote, I really feel good about having a two-headed monster, if you will, at running back. Two different style running backs, both very capable. And I think with the right offensive line can provide a real foundation for success going forward. Smith, over the last 5 years in Tennessee and as the OC and as the head coach in Atlanta, Falcons were third in rush EPA in 2022, horrible in 2023. And I think that Najee Harris, who he's not old for a running back, but he's got a lot of tread on the tires, I think is interesting here because you can hate the Steelers' offense, but still find value in Najee Harris. You can hate the way that the Pittsburgh Steelers are moving the ball down the field, but still find a niche in your fantasy football drafting strategy to include Jaylen Warren. I want you to weigh in on both those players. I want you to weigh in on Deontay Johnson and George Pickens. Before you do, I'm going to tell you this right now. Andrew, in the Never Too Early FFPC Best Ball Tournament, you are looking at an ADP for Najee Harris as running back 29 at the end of the 8th round, and you're looking at Jaylen Warren as running back 31 in the middle of the 9th round. Your thoughts on the way high-stakes players are treating the Steelers' offense and running back specifically here at this moment?
I think they're checking out my early rankings because that's pretty much where I have those guys ranked. Jaylen Warren, 29, Najee Harris, 30. So I actually have Warren ahead of Najee Harris. And in some formats last year, Jaylen Warren outscored Najee Harris straight up. So I think that the running game is going to be, like you said, it's going to be at the forefront. So I think that these guys are probably both worth drafting at their price tag, especially with the way Najee produces. Like for him, it's always a tale of two halves where he starts out the season horrible and everyone's like, why'd I draft this guy? And then they're like, oh, let's run the ball in the second half of the season. And then he finally scores touchdowns. So that's kind of been Najee's MO, but he gets a lot of touches, but really he's not a super efficient player. Whereas Jaylen Warren, we're starting to see the ascension with him even this past year where it was frustrating at times, but he's still the super explosive running back that they're trying to get the ball more to. So for me, it's still Jaylen Warren. I still like him more, especially if he's a little bit cheaper than Najee. But I think that both these guys are going to be serviceable running backs for your team. And because there are two of them in the same backfield, that makes their prices suppressed. And the fact that there's enough fantasy rhetoric about Arthur Smith and how horrible he is that people will not want to touch Steelers players no matter what, even though when you look back at his days with Tennessee, where Arthur Smith is not a good head coach, but he's not a bad offensive coordinator. That's something that we need to be accepting towards. And if he can get a Ryan Tannehill level-esque, season out of Kenny Pickett or whoever they make the quarterback, maybe it is Ryan Tannehill. Maybe they bring him in as a backup to push Kenny Pickett like they did when they were trying to push Marcus Mariota. Then they benched him and put Tannehill in. So I think that they're going to be more productive and anything's better than the Matt Canada offense. And I will say, between Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, I think that as much as I've been a Deontay Johnson fan, any type of more a less voluminous offense does not work well for Deontay, who he commands targets. That's what he does. He vacuums up targets. Whereas George Pickens is this big play threat. And to me, I look at Pickens and can he be the AJ Brown in this offense that we saw Arthur Smith use in Tennessee, where play action? And who are they hitting down on a slant route? It's George Pickens for a massive play. So maybe he's not getting a ton of targets every week, which is going to be frustrating if they're going to be running the ball a ton. But who's the big play threat? It's George Pickens. And he definitely comes with that type of AJ Brown type of mold where, he's a bit of a diva, wants the ball, but if they feed him just enough, he can be happy and produce for the offense. So that's kind of the way I would view it. And again, if everyone hates the Steelers offense, then I think the move is to buy it at a discount.
Let me ask you this, with what you just said with Pickens and Johnson. I can tell you right now in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, George Pickens, 609, Deontay Johnson, 812. So obviously you like Pickens better. Do you like him 2 rounds better than Deontay Johnson?
Probably not. I mean, I think that they're both in that wide receiver 3 range. And I think that Deontay's more of the, he's going to give you more steady production. Again, the guy doesn't catch touchdowns from Kenny Pickett, so that's a big issue. All of his touchdowns came from non-Kenny Pickett quarterbacks, so that's problematic. And George Pickens, we saw it all year long where the guy has this innate ability to just turn one ball into a massive play. It's just not Deontay Johnson's game. So in best ball, especially, I think I would rather pay for Pickens. But again, looking at value, Deontay's not bad there.
He's not bad there, and Andrew Erickson is not bad anywhere. You can check out all of his work at fantasypros.com at Andrew Erickson _ on the X machine. Let's step out and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to find out where Andrew stands on certain players. James Conner, Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts. Speaking of the Falcons, we'll talk with him about that. He's Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. You are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show exclusively on the Better Sports Network. We roll on right after this.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, but they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. I there's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But
yeah.
Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman, and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky, is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here. 23 minutes until the top of the hour, exclusively on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the RotoViz High Stakes Slowdown, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship at myffpc.com. I am joined by Andrew Erickson at Andrew Erickson _ on the X machine. Andrew Erickson, who writes for fantasypros.com. at Fantasy Pros on the X. I don't know exactly how I want to start this segment. I'm going to do it with a coaching change that would happen. Jeremy Fowler has reported that the Carolina Panthers are going to hire Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers coach Brad Idzik as their new offensive coordinator. I believe he's had some experience working with some young wide receivers in Seattle, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. Very young guy, but quite frankly, so is Dave Canales. As he joins the Panthers here, there is an influx of youth on the coaching staff for the Carolina Panthers. Andrew, is that enough for you to say, hey, I'm kind of excited for Jonathan Mingo. I'm kind of excited for Bryce Young, Adam Thielen. What are your vibes like with the Panthers after these coaching hires over the last week?
Well, I love the movement towards youth. You know, looking at some of these teams that entered last year with question marks, the Packers, the Texans, what do they have on their side was youth. And youth is where you obviously bring question marks, but you also bring upside. And the Panthers, I think, attacked the offseason last year the wrong way. Retread head coach, old wide receivers. And what do you know? It didn't work out. Like, so for me, it's like we need to get back to youth, building around guys that Bryce Young can then grow with. Not, okay, now that we're going to win now. I think they thought that they were in a better position to win games after how they finished the season in 2022, thinking that they could just throw Bryce Young in and then win games, but that was not the case. So I am optimistic that they can be much better next year. I think that the Bryce Young season is a lot like the Trevor Lawrence season, where it's just like, you got to throw this rookie year out, man. Like, what was he supposed to do? Like who was going to have success there? Like, nobody. So Mingo, I'm not particularly excited about. He was a boomer bust prospect coming out of Ole Miss, and the fact that he just ran so many routes, he couldn't get targets. Like, that was the biggest issue. Like, he's getting out targeted by Adam Thielen, DJ Chark whenever he was healthy. So I think that they're going to, again, we talked about earlier in the show, T. Higgins. I could easily see him landing in Carolina. I know I talked about youth, but a player that I think that Dave Canales has a good relationship that could hit the market, Tyler Lockett, bringing him in as a reliable, steady asset for a Bryce Young player with Adam Thielen. So again, they do need to bring in some youth. Hopefully they draft some receivers or they sign someone like T. Higgins in free agency. Like, they're in the market for a wide receiver. They were doing it last year. They want to bring somebody in to help Bryce Young. So I think you're going to see maybe even Mike Evans. Who knows? Maybe he goes with Dave Canales. Like, hey, let's go to the Panthers. Let's tear it up. Let's keep it going. So I'm optimistic that they can get some stuff done in Carolina. I think it's nowhere but up. They can't be worse. And look, Bryce Young was the number one overall pick for a reason. Like, I truly don't believe he's as bad as he was in what he showed last year. I just don't believe that. So I think he can improve, and I think we can squeeze some more fantasy juice out of this team in 2024.
I'm going to ask you about Chuba Hubbard in a little bit, but according to the Fantasy Mojo, myffpc.com, never too early best ball tournament stats go, not one Carolina Panther is going in the single-digit rounds. That's right. Every single Panther is going 10th round or later, led by none other than Chuba Hubbard at the 10:01. Thielen, a 13th round pick. Jonathan Mingo, 16th. Bryce Young, 16th. Miles Sanders, 17th. You don't have to like the Panthers' collection of talent right now, but what you have to like is the value that you're getting on these players, and I think there's some value there, as Andrew just pointed out. Andrew, it's not often that we get breaking news on this program. It's Thursday night. There's not a ton going on. But I can tell you this. Adam Schefter just tweeted that the Las Vegas Raiders are expected to hire former Arizona Cardinals head coach Cliff Kingsbury as their new offensive coordinator. This is per his sources. Now, Kingsbury, who apparently Mark Davis flew to Southeast Asia to get this guy back in. I don't know. I can't comment on that. But he's going to be, let's assume he is the offensive coordinator going forward. I think this is good news for the Raiders. I think it's good news for the skill position guys. I don't know what they're going to do with quarterback. I know there's whispers they could get Russell Wilson. They could get another quarterback there. But Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Michael Mayer, Zamir White, I don't know. Your thoughts initially as you are hit with this in the face at this point, your thoughts on Cliff Kingsbury becoming the new OC in Las Vegas?
Well, I got to say, I got to take the low-hanging fruit. We got the Air Raiders because we got the Air Raid coach coming in for the Air Raiders. So that's what they're going to be known as heading into this year, the Air Raiders. We know they're going to run a lot of plays. That's good for PPR formats. So again, Cliff Kingsbury, he came into this season, or when he was the head coach of the Cardinals, he really tried to implement his scheme onto players that probably didn't fit. So it'll be interesting to kind of see, based on the talent in Las Vegas, which I think is pretty strong. Like you talked about, you mentioned some of those guys, like good receivers, intriguing tight end entering his second season. So it's going to be, has Cliff Kingsbury kind of learned from what the mistakes were in Arizona? Like always running 4 wide receiver sets when it's like, dude, you don't have 4 good wide receivers to put on the field. Like, why are we continuing to do this? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested to kind of see what the rhetoric is about him talking about the offense and seeing if he comes out as like, yeah, no, I've learned a lot, in my time away from the game. And I think that's what he has to adapt to, is really looking at like, who look at the current personnel. How can I get the most? Because I think that's what the best offensive coordinators do. Get the best out of the personnel they have. Like Ben Johnson, I think does a great job of that in Detroit. Like he's not trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. Like that's not what he's doing. He's getting the best out of the players he already has on his offense. So again, I think from a pace of play, it's probably a good thing. I know that the up tempo is something that he's always done. And I think that'll probably continue to be a thing for the Raiders. So I think that's good. But yeah, I mean, based on, the other hires they could have brought in probably could have been worse. And I think ultimately the fact they brought Pierce back as the head coach is ultimately the best thing that could have happened for this team. That's what they're excited about. And I think Cliff Kingsbury is probably a fine offensive coordinator to bring in.
This is a selfish thing because I have Michael Mayer in a lot of dynasty teams. What are your thoughts on him? Because I feel like I'm unfairly comparing him to Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta and these big time tight ends that hit the scene last year. You remain, I don't want to put words in your mouth, cautiously optimistic on Michael Mayer going forward in Las Vegas?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think he just got a raw deal. Like, look, let's be honest here. If he had switched spaces with Sam Laporta, do you really think Sam Laporta would have broken all these rookie records with the Raiders?
No.
Like, that's what I mean. It was so situation based. Like, Michael Mayer just got the worst team. Like, in the worst situation. Like, sorry, I got to compete for targets with Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers.
Right.
Like, he got a raw deal. Like, he didn't have a chance. And he had, Aiden O'Connell as his quarterback. How the thing with rookie tight ends is most rookie tight ends get drafted to bad teams with bad quarterbacks, and that's why rookie tight ends were bad. But what do you know? When rookie tight end has Josh Allen and Jared Goff as their quarterbacks, they perform well. So, yeah, I would hold a light on for Michael Mayer, especially because he's going to be a late-round tight end, essentially, that you can get much later. But I think the talent is still there. He's a good player. He's going to have a full-time role. Austin Hooper's gone in free agency. So, yeah, I think that he could make some noise potentially in this offense. And, yeah, I would be all over taking Michael Mayer in later rounds.
What about if you had to make a call February 1st, 2024, who is the starting quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders week 1 of the 2024 NFL season? Is it Aiden O'Connell? Is it someone else? How do you see this, Andrew? And by the way, saying you have no blanking idea is a fair answer.
I mean, I think it's going to probably be Aiden O'Connell. I think that he showed enough ups and downs. I mean, remember when they fired Josh McDaniels last year, they fired the entire offensive coaching staff. Like that's all Josh McDaniels did was offense. Right. And then they fired him and took away all the offensive pieces. It's like, of course, the Raiders offense was going to go through a ton of ups and downs as they're changing the offense on the fly with a rookie quarterback. So I think O'Connell, again, had a lot of really bad games, but I mean, we all saw that one game, the Thursday night game against the Chargers. He was perfect in that game. He was perfect.
Yes, he was.
Clearly, he has some upside, especially with all these weapons. And they've talked about, we're going to bring in competition for Aiden O'Connell. I think that's totally fine. And it's like, if he wins out the job, it's like, why can't this guy be a Brock Purdy-esque type of quarterback? Like, you see quarterbacks get drafted in day 3 that end up being guys that can produce because they're distributors. And that's what he showed last year at times. That I can get the ball to our playmakers, which the Raiders have a ton of.
More on Devontae Adams to come later on in the program. Before we get to that, you just touched on Ben Johnson. We can touch on this real quick. I know, God, we're running out of time again. I hate this, but I love it. Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network has reported that Ben Johnson is going to stand pat as the OC for the Detroit Lions going forward. He's not going to be the head coach of the Commanders, which is Dan Quinn. He is not going to be the head coach of the Seahawks, which is Mike McDonald. We saw a huge breakout from a lot of players on the Lions last year. Sam Laporta, unbelievable. Jahmyr Gibbs, fantastic. David Montgomery, still relevant. Amon-Ra St. Brown, first-round pick. Do you think that continues? Because they're keeping Ben Johnson, do you think that continues throughout 2024? Or is drafting Lions a more nuanced approach this season?
No, I don't think. I mean, I don't think people were sleeping on the Lions last year. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown was a round 1-2 turn pick. Like, he was really highly drafted. Gibbs was a 3rd round pick. Like, obviously, Laporta is going to be way more expensive now. Like, he's the big change guy, and that's probably the guy I would least be exposed to be totally honest, is just buying the hype on a second-year tight end. But no, I think this offense can still continue to produce at a high level. I mean, is that defense going to get any better anytime soon? Especially with that secondary, just so many issues on it. So, Yeah, I think that the Lions, again, I always joke about this whenever we talk about it from a betting perspective, but I always talk about Ford Field as the Coors Field of the NFL, where every game in Ford Field, it's just another over. It's just another over. So as long as the Lions continue to host games at Ford Field, we're going to continue to get fantasy points from their team and the teams that they're playing. So, yeah, I think the Lions are, again, I think it's status quo. I'm really glad Ben Johnson's back because I was worried about, like, had he not returned, oh, my God, now I have all these concerns about this Lions offense. Like we saw when with the Eagles, for example, when they lost Shane Steichen, wasn't kind of talked about nearly as much. And then we saw, oh my God, this makes a huge difference. I think we could have seen that potentially happen to the Lions had they lost Ben Johnson.
Let's talk about where you stand on certain players in the NFL right now. And specifically, I want to get into some running backs here. James Conner, running back 22 in the Never Too Early FFPC Best Ball Tournament. He is going at least 704 currently. Now, to give you some context here, to not only to you, Andrew, but to the viewers as well. James Conner right now is going in the neighborhood of right behind Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, Joe Mixon. He's going right ahead of David Montgomery, Austin Eckler, Javonte Williams. Knowing what we know about Arizona right now, which granted could change, but I think that there's also a certain stability that we don't normally see with these teams that are coming off really, really historically bad years. There is something to like about James Conner here as running back 22 at the end, at the beginning of the 7th round.
I like James Conner a lot. Again, he finished the season strong. He's a bell cow. He's 29 years old. He's entering his contract year. Like, why would they not just run this guy on the ground? Again, we're always trying to write off James Conner as this guy who's just going to turn into dust, but he's an Iron Man. Like, yeah, he's going to miss a couple games here and there, but he plays running back. Most running backs do miss games, but he comes back. And most importantly, like, when he's on the field, he's super productive. And this year, he doesn't have to play half the season without a starting quarterback. So I think Arizona is one of these other teams that I don't think the market is, like, reacting to. Like, Kyler Murray is back. Kyler Murray is a really good quarterback. Like, this offense can cook. And again, I talked about Ford Field being the overs. You know who the other field that was all overs? Arizona, Glendale. Overs in every single game at home this past year. 8-0 towards the over. So again, another team where it's like they're playing at home in the dome. We're going to get points. So yes, I love James Conner at that back end RB2 price tag.
What about, let's move on and stay with the same position. Let's go a little bit deeper into the draft. Chuba Hubbard. Not running back 22. He's running back 32. 1001 right now. This is the Raheem Mostert, Jalen Warren, Zach Charbonnet, Trey Benson territory of the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. I think one of the things to keep in mind here, we're going to have an NFL draft here coming up in a couple of months that could radically change this. But if you're drafting right now, you can't worry about that. You have to focus on the now. How do you handle Chuba Hubbard right now as running back 32 in the early 10th round? Andrew Erickson, where do you stand on Chuba Hubbard?
I would draft him because I think that he's going to be the starting running back for the Carolina Panthers. And he showed us last year. He beat out Miles Sanders, who the team paid a ton of money. Did not matter. Chuba Hubbard beat him out squarely, was more efficient as a rusher. And the thing I pointed out, you can find this in the fantasy forecast. It's actually one of the things I thought was most interesting when I was doing it, where, Dave Canales obviously comes from Tampa Bay. He played the Carolina Panthers twice last year. Two of Chuba Hubbard's best games came against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He rushed for over 100 yards against the Buccaneers' vaulted run defense that not a lot of running backs can do. He was only one of the second guys to do it all season to rush for 100 yards, the other being DeAndre Swift. So I think Canales knows, like, hey, they've got a pretty good running back already in Carolina. We have so many other things to address with our team. Like, why are we going to spend any type of high-end draft capital? We already spent a ton of money on Miles Sanders. So I can't see them doing that again in free agency, bringing in and spending money. They already did that, and it didn't work. So Hubbard on a rookie deal, playing on his last year of his contract, churn and burn, baby. Dave Canales is not a dummy. If I can get RB production from a cheap guy that's productive, I'm going to do that. So I'm buying this right now with the fear that, he's going to lose his job. It's like, well, maybe he does, but you're investing a 10th round pick for it. But the reward is, I can get a starting running back in the 10th round with a 3-down skill set and an offense that's going to be better than last year. Sign me up.
I think we have seen how tournaments like this have been won on picks like that going forward for sure. Tennessee Titans, let's talk about them very briefly. NFL.com reports that Derrick Henry said he is still of the belief that he can get a 2,000-yard season in him. Quote, I'm not even close to done playing. I still feel like I could run for another 2,000, but that's for the future to tell. He's 30 years old. He is an impending free agent. He suggested during this interview with NFL.com that he might land up wherever Mike Vrabel does as a head coach. Mike Vrabel's not landing a head coaching gig. Like, maybe he's a defensive coordinator somewhere, but he ain't head coaching anywhere now. Lowest yards per carry of his career for Derrick Henry in 2023 at 4.2. He has the second fewest rushes of 10 or more yards. This is not good for Derrick Henry, which is perfect because I don't want to talk about Derrick Henry. I want to talk about Tyjae Spears. Andrew, Tyjae Spears in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, running back 18 at the 607. He is going in the neighborhood of the aforementioned Derrick Henry, Ramondre Stevenson, Aaron Jones, and Tony Pollard. Is that too high for Spears, knowing that Tennessee could do something in free agency or the draft, or quite frankly, bring back Derrick Henry? I know you like Spears, but do you like him that much?
I think it is risky, the fact they could bring in Derrick Henry, but I think, again, you're shooting for first place here. And Spears can be a player that, okay, if everything shakes out and he ends up being the running back for the Tennessee Titans, like RB 16 or 17, wherever he is, that's too cheap for him, to be totally honest. Like, he flashed a ton as a rookie. And again, like, he reminds me so much of Rachaad White's rookie season. Like, splits carries and touches with a veteran back, Leonard Fournette, but like has some question marks. The team has question marks. Like, how good is the Titans offensive line? We don't really know. But like, the thing that he did was he played alongside Derrick Henry the entire season. He was out snapping Derrick Henry like every other week. So the fact that they put him on the field so much, like, management believes in Tyjae Spears, just like they believe in Will Levis. So I think that he's going to be the guy. I agree with having him ranked up there, being drafted as RB 18, because he can be this year's Rachaad White. And Rachaad White was a top 5 running back. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think you have to look at, especially when you're considering, trying to win these leagues, trying to get in the forefront of all these teams that are drafting prior to April 25th in the Never Too Early tournament. You can get Tyjae Spears at a really discounted price. If he is this year's Rachaad White, he is a massive, massive buy at running back 18 going forward. Let's flip over to receivers. Andrew, I don't normally like to take stands on players because I feel like I'm wrong all the time. One of the players I did take a stand on this past year was Calvin Ridley. I did not believe in Calvin Ridley, not necessarily because of his talent, but because he had been away from the game for a year and a half. He's going to a new quarterback, new OC, new head coach, new offense, new team, new everything, basically. And the fact that he was going at that third, fourth round for high-stakes tournaments in the FFPC, I was like, you know what? I can't condone people taking him that high. However, this year, he is falling in ADP to wide receiver 31. He is going in the mid-fifth round. After Drake London, Amari Cooper, Malik Neighbors, he is going before Christian Kirk, Jordan Addison, and George Pickens. Where do you stand in 2024 drafts on one Calvin Ridley from the Jacksonville Jaguars?
I'm drafting him because last year the expectations were out of control. Like, he couldn't have paid off. It was impossible because everyone was expecting him just like get back, dropped off, missing 3 years of football, and then go for 1,500 receiving yards. Like,
Right.
It was like that. This is unfair to him because when you look at his actual numbers, like, he actually wasn't really that bad. Like, again, it was an up and down season, very inconsistent. But again, like, the entire Jaguars offense just totally steamed up where expectations just could not be met. They had to be perfect, and they weren't perfect. But anyone that watched the Jaguars play last year, they left so much production on the table every single week. But Calvin Ridley, again, talking about how do you find the easiest path to a wide receiver one season is touchdowns. Calvin Ridley tied CeeDee Lamb with 24 end zone targets last year. 24. Yep. If he converts just a fraction more of those, like, we're not even complaining about Calvin Ridley's season. We're like, oh my God, this guy was a monster. He caught 14 touchdowns. It was great. I think it's a case of we were just a year too early. And I don't think that that's preposterous to say because the guy was coming off so much missed time. Okay, now he's got 1 year under his belt. He's going to be 30 in December. So I'm not worried about his age. He's still 29 years old. I'm buying Calvin. I'm buying the Jags. While everyone else is chasing the Texans, steaming them up, I'm going to take the discount on the Jaguars.
I think that's so important. And for anybody who is watching this, like, your ears should prick up now. Let me tell you a little something about Calvin Ridley. 76 catches, over 1,000 yards, and 8 touchdowns last year. This is a player that was going, again, like I said, end of the second, early third, mid-third round. He is now going super late. Wide receiver 31. The mid-fifth round, you're going to get a 1,000-yard receiver on a team that, quite frankly, I mean, we can talk about Evan Ingram. We don't have to touch on him much, but that guy had one of the best tight end receiving seasons of all time. Of all time. And you're telling me that that's going to continue? I don't believe it. I believe he takes a step back. I believe Calvin Ridley takes a step forward. And if he takes a step forward from 76 catches, 8 touchdowns, and 1,000 yards, and you can get him in the mid-fifth round, Ridley is one of those few guys, Andrew, where I was totally off on him in 2023, and I'm totally on him in 2024. I think it can happen. I'm on board with Ridley in the mid-fifth round, for sure. Jalen Waddle, let's talk about him. With the Miami Dolphins offense this year, I think there were 5 players to talk about. And I think the one that got the least amount of conversation was Jalen Waddle. Everybody wanted to talk about Tyreek Hill, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Tua Tagovailoa. Not a lot of people wanted to talk about Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle had one of his worst years as a pro this past year. Now, you want to talk about, okay, well, it was because of injury. It was because of, all these other players taking a step forward. It was because of game script. Okay, I get that. Like, it makes perfect sense. However, Jalen Waddle still had a third straight 1,000-yard year. He still had 72 catches. And I feel like the fact that he only had, 4 touchdowns this past year? The fact that he only had that, and everybody wants to, as you were calling it, and I'll borrow the phrase, steam up the Dolphins running game, steam up Tyreek Hill. Like, we can't forget about Jalen Waddle. And I think people are forgetting about him in the never too early drafts right now. Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 23 at the 403. Andrew, I was in leagues last year where he was going off as a second or third round pick. This to me suggests a massive buying opportunity here again for Waddle, and not a lot of people are looking at it.
Oh my God, that's crazy that he's going that late after. I mean, look, yeah, the touchdowns weren't there, but again, is Raheem Mostert really going to score 20 touchdowns again? No. And what does that mean? It's either the Dolphins just score less touchdowns overall, or call me crazy, Jalen Waddle finds pay dirt. Like that's what's going to happen, because when you look at what Waddle did, again, you mentioned he still had over 1,000 receiving yards. He had a 24% target share. That's really good considering Tyreek Hill had like a 35% target share in the offense. And he had a career high yards per route run, and PFF receiving grade was 5th in the NFL. So he was still super efficient. He just didn't end up putting up the fantasy points, but that's touchdowns. That's fluky. And that's the biggest thing is like when you find things that are just unsustainable, that's what you want to fade, and you want to fade it in the opposite direction. So if Raheem Mostert doesn't score these touchdowns, what does that mean? Okay, it probably means that the touchdown is going to go to somebody else. Tyreek Hill is another year older. Would it be really that shocking to see Jalen Waddle maybe finally take that step and usurp Tyreek Hill if he's another step slower? I don't think it's crazy. And now you're getting Jalen Waddle at a wicked discount. Yeah, I love that. I think that he's an easy top 20 wide receiver. So to see him going outside the top 20, that's wild to me.
All right, so we're on Jalen Waddle. You and I both. We're rooting for more Penguin touchdown celebrations this year. Now, we touched on this briefly, but not for the reasons you'd think. Arthur Smith is no longer in Atlanta. He is going to be in Pittsburgh, which means he is no longer in Atlanta, obviously. Kyle Pitts, who I have said for years has been the most polarizing player in FFPC drafts since he's been drafted. He was a rookie tight end. You don't want to draft rookie tight ends. Then he was a sophomore guy. Is he going to live up to it? Then he couldn't, come through because of injuries in Arthur Smith. But it's like every single year there is something going on with Kyle Pitts. The knee he injured in 2022, which he played through in 2023, Kyle Pitts told the media about 2 weeks ago that it feels better now. Arthur Smith said in the fall that Pitts was in a, quote, long journey to full health after he hurt his MCL and his PCL in 2022. 53 catches, 667 yards, 3 touchdowns this past year. And he talked about in an interview with ESPN that he wasn't 100% this past season. Well, quite frankly, I'm not surprised. He said he wanted to get through the whole season without missing any games, and he accomplished that. He started in every single game for Atlanta. Now, if he is fully recovered from this injury and he gets a new coaching staff, which he's going to get in 2024, Mother of God, Kyle Pitts, is he finally going to unlock everything that we hoped he would? Andrew Erickson, Kyle Pitts, tight end 11. At the 6'12", he's no longer polarizing. He's just a sleeper at this point. Are you in on Kyle Pitts in a tight end premium scoring league like the Fantasy Pros Championship, like the FFPC main event, tight end 11 at the end of the 6th round? You on board with that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair price for Kyle Pitts, just based on what we know he can offer. I mean, that's exactly where I have him ranked as my tight end 11. So again, I'm kind of lockstep with the market, but I realize like he's only going to go as far as the quarterback goes. Like it's not shocking to find that the best tight ends usually have good quarterbacks attached to them. Like because tight ends are so touchdown dependent, they just need good passers to produce. It's really hard for tight ends to overcome bad quarterback play more than the other positions. So again, Atlanta has made some right moves. I like Zach Robinson coming in as OC, Raheem Morris, but who's under center? Like that matters. This matters so much to what Atlanta does. And if it's just another retread, Desmond Ridder, that's not going to work. So I'm still waiting to see what they do at quarterback before I make any proclamations about Kyle Pitts. But again, I'll leave the candle lit for Kyle Pitts to be a breakout if they do something at quarterback. Russell Wilson, I'd be happy with that.
Okay. And this is good because it's going to lead into my next question. One of the things I love about doing the show on Thursday nights, I get to get the best in the industry and ask them unfair questions, which they should not be able to answer. And I'm going to ask you that right now. Percentage chance that the starting quarterback for the Falcons in week 1 in 2024 is on the roster right now. What's the percentage chance, Andrew, that you feel that whoever's starting for the Falcons this year is already on the roster?
I'm saying 0%.
0%, no way. Tyler Soto is saying 0% as well. Okay.
There's no way that they can start Desmond Ridder. And unless all the quarterbacks get hurt or something like that. That's the only way I could see them actually starting Desmond Ridder voluntarily. I cannot believe that Arthur Blank would be on board or okay with Desmond Ridder after they gave him the green light last year. It's like, we're not doing this again. Taylor Heineke, no, we're not doing that. So yeah, I don't think the quarterback's on the roster right now.
Okay, fair enough. I'm leading the witness, Your Honor, right now. Here's what I'm going to do next. Percentage chance that Justin Fields is the starting quarterback for week 1 for the Atlanta Falcons in 2024, which is important, Andrew, because there's going to be people drafting Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts based on who the starting quarterback is. Percentage chance that it's Justin Fields week 1.
I will say 25%.
25. Okay. Now there's something here. Okay. 25% that Fields is the starting quarterback. You have told me 0% that the starting quarterback is on the roster. You have told me that Justin Fields is 25%. Who else are we looking at in Atlanta? Who is the odds-on favorite in Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros opinion to be the starting quarterback for week 1 in 2024?
Man.
You mentioned Russell Wilson. So we can throw him into the gumbo here, and you can pull him out with the ladle if you want. I'm going to leave it up to you.
Russell Wilson. I'm just looking at quarterback rankings for players because I'm trying to think who could have a relationship with Raheem Morris, Zach Robinson, who's been with the Rams for a long time. The Rams really haven't had that many quarterbacks. I can't.
Okay.
I mean, look, if Carson Wentz, honestly, would not be that bad of an option.
I love it. And this is why we get into the minutia here on this show. I think what we really want to figure out, and you don't have to answer a quarterback question on this. I think that what we really want to figure out is if we are drafting February 1st, 2024, which a lot of FFPC players are, how do we handle not necessarily who the quarterback is going to be for Atlanta, but how do we handle guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson? I think that's what the question we're trying to answer here is. So is the quarterback that important for those 3 players? Has the question already been answered with the head coach and the offensive coordinator. I think that's the thing we're trying to figure out here, Andrew. Are there any wild sweeping ADP switches for you with London, with Pitts, with Robinson, based on specifically the quarterback, which we don't know at this point?
Yeah, I think that's the important thing to ask yourself when you decide to click the button on one of those guys, where it's like, okay, like you have to play this scenario. Is that so? I guess Justin Fields would probably be the best case scenario just based on the available quarterbacks. Like if they trade for him versus signing a veteran, and then how does the market react to it? So because you don't want to necessarily draft these Atlanta players and then them draft or they bring in some retread quarterback and then their prices get cheaper because then you drafted them when they were more expensive. Like you don't want to do that. So if you really feel like, hey, at this point, like I'm not super optimistic about the quarterback they're going to bring in, then I would be hesitant to draft those guys at their current prices, knowing that, okay, when they eventually do sign Joe Schmo or whatever off the waiver wire, the market's going to react negatively and then you can get them at a better price versus if you really are gun-ho, like, no, I think the Justin Fields thing is going to happen. I think they're going to make a splash at quarterback. They have to. Then I would be drafting them more aggressively.
I think that that is smart. I think that is something that we should take to heart. And I think that the Atlanta Falcons, until we get some sort of realization or some sort of concrete clarity on what they're going to do at the quarterback position, they are going to be one of the most fascinating teams to follow in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. I wanted to get into much more with you. I don't know if we're going to be able to because we're way past time. And I want to talk Jordan Love, Anthony Richardson. Maybe I can still weave that in. Let's step out. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros at Andrew Erickson _ is going to rejoin me, Eric Balkman from the FFPC. We are going to get through, again, just a small chunk because it is such a massive piece that Andrew has put out on fantasypros.com. The 2024 fantasy football forecast. We're going to get through the NFC, the players that I want to target. Let's talk about the Bears running backs. Let's talk about Chris Godwin. Let's talk about Darren Waller as well. That is all coming up in the second hour of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show exclusively on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after this.
Of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coop A Fiasco yesterday when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And I, since he covers fantasy football, I said, "Hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year?" And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL." And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my my roommate and good friend who, got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there. NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one, the holy grail of NHL games, NHL 94 for the Sega Genesis, right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game was.
No, let me stop you right there. So people, VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called a VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta that didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
you don't even need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version. And then
you got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to be always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
13 minutes, 14 minutes past the top of the hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, exclusively on the Better Sports Network. It is Fantasy Football Night in America. I am Eric Balkman from the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the FFPC, myffpc.com, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, youtube.com/FFPC Fantasy. I want to get into our thoughts on, not our thoughts, but our guest thoughts tonight. Our guest co-host, Andrew Erickson, at Andrew Erickson _, on fantasypros.com, at fantasypros on the X machine. My God, we got a lot through tonight. Are you playing? Listen, I know all your cohorts, like Derek Brown has co-hosted this show before. Thor Nystrom has co-hosted this show before. They're all at the Senior Bowl. So you basically are the janitor for Fantasy Pros right now, right, Andrew? Like, they're all out living the life. I saw the photo from Thor. They're pounding out 6 a.m. Waffle House breakfast before they're grinding out 12-hour days at the Senior Bowl right now. How much Dynasty stuff do you get into?
Yeah, so I am playing catch up on the Dynasty stuff, but I do have rookie rankings that'll be coming out shortly, do Dynasty rankings. The thing that I focus on, obviously, it's still working on kind of previewing NFL free agency. So again, those guys are great at what they do when it comes to, obviously, Thor is the college football. He lives and breathes college football. He does two things: breathes and watches college football. and Debro, again, is obviously film grinder. That's one of his best talents. So they're being best used down at the Senior Bowl, where I'm holding down the fort here, picking up the scraps with NFL stuff that's kind of trickling in left and right, updating rankings. So I'm cool with it because, you know, my time to shine will come. So no worries.
Yeah, well, yeah, like, you do great work for sure. And I do remind everybody, if you're looking for Dynasty information and you want to play Dynasty, we love fantasy football. You're watching this. You love fantasy football. Why not play it 365 days a year? Go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Pick up some Dynasty Orphan teams. Numerous squads have already had their 2024 entry fees lowered. We have 500, 750, 1,250 teams. Some of them discounted as low as $1. You could play in a $1,250 entry fee for $1 this season. Check that out, myffpc.com, myffpc.com. One of the riddles, the ciphers, what's the line from Seinfeld? Mysteries wrapped in a riddle, smothered in secret sauce, is trying to figure out not the rookies. I mean, that's a thing in and of itself, but these players that have already had experience in the NFL. How do we handle them for 2024 redrafts? How do we handle them for 2024 rookie free agent drafts? How do we handle them going forward in fantasy football? Let's kick things off with the Bears running backs. Now, Andrew, I in a lot of rookie drafts last year, end of the second, early third round, I was taking Roschon Johnson in a lot of leagues. Didn't really have any faith in him doing anything in 2023, but quite frankly, even if you draft a running back early in your rookie drafts, I think the following year is when you're expecting the spoils of those draft picks. So I look at Roschon Johnson from the standpoint, yeah, he's in a crowded backfield with Khalil Herbert. I don't know I should look it up, and I didn't, and I apologize. The contract situation with Deontay Foreman and the fact that they could draft another running back this year. But the fact that they drafted him last year and the fact that they gave him so much run at the end of this past season, and the same head coach, Matt Eberflus, is coming back. I know Shane Waldron is the new OC there. I kind of feel better about Roschon Johnson as a guy that, yeah, I'm not going to be able to start every week, but there's probably going to be 4 or 5 weeks where I can start him with confidence, and he's going to come through for me. How do you feel about the Bears running backs as we turn towards your analysis on the 2024 fantasy football forecast, which you can get at fantasypros.com? Check out Andrew Erickson's piece there. It is a novel, and it is a fantastic novel. We'll try to focus in on as many things as we can over the course of the last 42 minutes. Your thoughts on the Bears running backs to lead things off.
Yeah, so with the Bears, so Deontay Foreman's a free agent. I can't imagine he's going to be back with this team. So he's going to end up on another team and end up leading that team in rushing yards by the time the season ends for like the 4th straight year. For some reason, teams don't like Deontay Foreman, even though he just produces pretty much everywhere he goes. But he's not going to be a Bear. So I think that whittling the backfield down to 2 running backs is key here, because there's a three-headed monster that we really was not productive. And I do think, yeah, Roschon should be the guy that's drafted first. I think it's logical to think that in his second year, the team puts him in his position to win the starting job. And Herbert has been fantastic whenever he's gotten opportunities, but he's still part of that previous regime. They did not draft him, and he's in a contract year. So they could trade him to another team. If another team experiences an injury at running back, Herbert could get traded. But I think they want Roschon to be the guy. And I think Roschon would have been the guy last year, but if you recall, he suffered a really bad concussion. So that he missed a lot of games. And I think that kind of stunted his rookie growth in year one. So he really never got to fully take on the role because he just was dealing with injuries, and then Foreman was playing well and Herbert was banged up. So it's like, it's really hard to parse between like the snaps, the touches all year long. But it's like, at the end of the day, Roschon was still involved a ton in the passing game, which we knew he was going to be based on what he did at Texas. And I think when it's all said and done, he probably will be their starting running back. So I would lean towards Roschon. I imagine he's probably going at a pretty cheap price in some of these early best ball drafts. I'd have to imagine he's like in the 30s, RB30 range-ish. So
yes, even deeper. Running back 38 at the 1107. He's going 2 picks ahead of Khalil Herbert at this point. So you are 100% on board with that.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on. Wide receiver, Chris Godwin, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Chris Godwin, in the divisional loss to the Detroit Lions, he gets 8 targets, catches 4 of them for 40 yards. And quite frankly, the playoffs weren't kind to Chris Godwin, but the month of December certainly was kind to Chris Godwin. Baker Mayfield threw to him a ton at the expense of Mike Evans, which I think is interesting to understand. He got over 1,000 yards for the 4th time in his 5 seasons in the NFL. 83 catches, but only 2 of them were for touchdowns. We know touchdowns are not a sticky stat, Andrew. He is coming into his age 28 season. And if Mike Evans moves on, you are looking at a fantastic opportunity if the Buccaneers decide to bring Baker Mayfield back, which I think they will. Chris Godwin right now in FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Drafts, wide receiver 39 at the 708. I absolutely love this spot for Godwin right now. Regardless of how you want to formulate your teams, until his ADP goes up, I'd be slamming this all day long.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can list 35 receivers that are better than Chris Godwin.
I can't.
I'm sorry. Like there's a point where it's like, dude, this price is just too good. I mean, he wasn't bad. I mean, again, it was the touchdowns. Like, he had the same amount of red zone targets as Mike Evans did, except Mike Evans scored 14 touchdowns and he scored 3, like, altogether. So again, it's the touchdown variance that it's not sticky year over year. So when the rankings are totally reflected and heavily based on touchdown production, those are points in your drafts that you want to fade. Like, it's much more likely that if Evans were to come back, that they would split touchdowns more evenly, even if it's not Godwin getting 14 and Evans getting 3. But for it to repeat so lopsided is very, very unlikely to happen. So I love Chris Godwin. I always like Chris Godwin. I know he's a good player too. It's like, he was getting targets. He's productive. He's 28 years old. Yeah. Wide receiver 40. Like, I used to look at wide receiver 40 as like fringe players, but you can get Chris Godwin. Like, who is he going around? Like, what are some of these names around?
I was gonna set you up for this. So he is going ahead of Brian Thomas, who's a rookie, Romeo Doubs, Deontay Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins. He's going ahead of all those guys. Okay. But the guys he's going behind, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Rome Odunze from Washington, the rookie, Terry McLaurin, Jaden Reed, George Pickens, Jordan Addison. The list goes on and on. Chris Godwin as wide receiver 39. If you take anything from this show tonight, the fact that you can get him after 38 wide receivers are off the board on average, I think that's what you need to do here tonight. I didn't think we'd be having this conversation this early in his career, but Cooper Kupp seems to be usurped by Puka Nacua as the number 1 option for Matthew Stafford and the Los Angeles Rams. Now, there is a polarizing discussion out there, and I don't want to say it's loud. I think it's more so silent right now because everybody's team Nacua after your coworker Derek Brown and Thor Nystrom have been singing the praises of Puka Nacua, by the way, on this program too. So anybody who watched the show,
They saw him
was
at
in
Senior
it.
Bowl. That's why
They
they're
saw
down
him
there.
at-
They're trying to
exactly, yeah.
find the next Puka Nacua.
Anybody who watched this show at the Senior Bowl last year was on Puka Nacua for sure. Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 24 right now, Andrew. He is 404. He's going behind Devonta Smith, Marvin Harrison Jr., Tank Dell, Keenan Allen, Jalen Waddle. He's going ahead of DK Metcalf, T. Higgins, and Zay Flowers. All those players are basically going within about 15 picks of each other. So it's very, very close. Cooper Kupp, how do you feel about him going forward, knowing that Nacua seems to be the number one option in that Rams offense? And if you want to pay for the number 2 option, you got to give up an early 4th round pick to get Cooper Kupp as the wide receiver 24 off the board.
Yeah, I think I'm good. I think I'm good on Cooper Kupp. Look, I mean, we saw this happen with Michael Thomas, right? We saw this magical season and then injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you don't get less injured when you get older. Like, this is the natural progression of a player that you have a unbelievable historic season, and then you get hurt, and you get hurt again, and what do you know? Like, you're never the same.
Yeah.
Again, we saw this with Michael Thomas, and it seems like, oh, he was so good, but not now. I don't. Does Michael Thomas even get drafted anymore? Like it's just like he's just gone from our memories, and it's like 2021 seems like it was just like a long time ago now for Cooper Kupp. Seems like a distant memory when he was just melting faces in fantasy football, and now it's like he got outproduced by a 6th-round rookie again. Puka Nacua was obviously amazing, not just a 6th-round rookie, but I digress. I think all the signs point to him being a player that's like, if he's not going to get back to that type of production, then you're just kind of holding on that he just does okay. I don't think so. I think with some of these receivers, it's not really a steady decline. It's you fall off a cliff. And I think the cliff is pretty visible with Cooper Kupp.
Right. I think that listen, I've said this for years. Fantasy football in the NFL, it's a young man's game. And if you want to roll with here's the weird thing about this. So and I bring this, I know the viewers of the show are going to be so sick of me talking about this. I have held on to Hines Ward for years and years and years after he was supposed to be done. And it worked out for me, right? To be the bag holder for Hines Ward. And eventually, he's going to fall. I'm probably doing the same thing with Travis Kelce in my leagues right now. There's something to be said for that. Cooper Kupp, I think, is interesting because if he somehow stands out in September where he has like 2 big games or something like that, all of a sudden I think that you can trade him, give up the best player in the deal and still come out ahead here, because I don't really have faith in Cooper Kupp for a number of reasons. His age, his injury history, and Puka Nacua. Like that strikes 1, 2, and 3 for me. And I think if you can get rid of him, again, not now, but if he has a couple of big games in September, you're looking at a pretty good return in your dynasty portfolio. That's my personal thought. Okay, who do we want to get into next? Dealer's choice. I'm going to pose this to you, Andrew. We can talk McLaurin, Olave, Jaden Reed, Devontae Smith, or Jackson Smith and Jigba. Pick one of those receivers.
Let's do JSN. Let's talk about
JSN.
Second-year player.
Okay, so he's a second-year player. We know Tyler Lockett is declining. We know DK Metcalf is still at the peak of his powers. We also know that I think it's 15 days, could be 16 days, that the Seahawks have to make a decision on whether to keep Geno Smith on the roster going forward, because it's a much more massive cap hit if they decide to release him after. I should know this. I don't. If they keep him past February 16th. And Seattle could draft a quarterback, or they could trade for a quarterback. So there's a lot of options here for the Seahawks. Let's talk about Smith and Jigba. Right now, if you look at the FFPC, never too early, best ball tournament, ADP, he's wide receiver 38, ironically going one spot ahead of Chris Godwin, who we just talked about, at the 703. Jackson Smith and Jigba. I remain bullish on him. I think he's in a good spot here. How do you feel about him?
I like JSN. Look, I think that the bigger question mark, not necessarily about Geno. I think the Seahawks got to keep Geno. I don't think they're in liberty to be like, oh, well, we don't want this guy. It's like, well, then who's your quarterback going to be? So I don't think that's the scenario that their new head coach wants to run into, especially a defensive-minded guy. I think he wants to try to keep cohesiveness on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, the last thing you want to do as a head coach is come and be like, okay, who's our quarterback? like I really feel like that's not a good way to run an organization, just my opinion. So I think Geno comes back. I think Tyler Lockett is more the interesting name, maybe as a trade candidate or someone that they potentially cut to save money. So I think that in itself is a window where things open up for Jackson Smith and Jigba to take a bigger leap into year 2. Look, he was still really efficient even as a rookie. Look, he was good after the catch, kind of flashing that underneath ability where DK Metcalf and Lockett are working more on the outside. And we can't forget, like, this guy entered the year with like a broken wrist. Remember? Right. Like he was banged up early on. We knew it was going to be an uphill battle getting targets between Lockett and Metcalf. And I think we just kind of got the poor range of outcomes when it came to JSN. Like Lockett and Metcalf basically played all the games. Like he never had an opportunity. But I will say, like, he did have flashes here and there. And I know that some will point to him not having any technical spike weeks of production. But we all remember that Dallas game where he caught a touchdown, but they called him out of bounds. He scored the touchdown in the game, and it would have given him a 20-point game. So don't say he didn't have any big games, because he did, but just didn't come up in the box score because he was ruled out of bounds. So I think that he's an interesting player to buy on. You could look at this offense changing philosophically, getting rid of the tight ends, Noah Fant, Will Dissly, Colby Parkinson. 2 of those guys are free agents. So for really opening up these 2 receiver sets, especially if JSN is that number 2 guy, we've seen guys thrive alongside DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett for years. Yeah. And if you remember, Tyler Lockett was a guy that flashed his rookie year, but it really took a little bit of time for him to start gelling as a younger player in this offense. So I like JSN a lot. I think it's a good price for him.
I think that the thing to keep in mind, again, I always bring this up all the time. When you're talking about rookies in dynasty rookie drafts, like, yeah, that's important. You want to get the right ones. But I think expecting stuff in their rookie year is a little bit like, if you get it with like Laporta and Kincaid, that's fantastic. But I don't think you can always expect it. And I think that when you look forward to next year and the second year, I think that there's something to like a lot there. So we'll see what happens with Jackson Smith and Jigba. But as a guy who drafted him in a lot of leagues, I'm very bullish on him, and we'll see if he can come through in 2024. Bill Hollywood hanging out in the YouTube chat right now. He wants to know, and we'll frame this from a redraft standpoint here. Jackson Smith and Jigba, wide receiver 38 at the 703 right now, and we'll talk about Zay Flowers in the next segment. Or Zay Flowers. Which one do you stand on at this point here? Which one's the better draft value? Zay Flowers, wide receiver 27 at the 501. Andrew, who would you rather have?
I'm going to go with Zay Flowers in that one. JSN ADP is right where I kind of have him ranked, so I have him wide receiver 37, but I'm much higher on Flowers than the drafters are. I have him at wide receiver 21 versus 27, where you said he's being drafted. So, yeah, I mean, look, Zay Flowers, man, like, he was consistently putting up a high target share all season long alongside even Mark Andrews. We saw his production spike when Andrews missed time, and that matters. Like, it matters when guys step up, because they should. Again, it's them meeting expectations that, okay, if this guy goes down, your production should spike, and it did. So I like that about Zay Flowers. I think that he's just an explosive player, and I go back to my initial kind of when I scouted him, like, he reminded me so much of like Antonio Brown, like the way that the way that he's able to make plays after the catch. And again, he was their offense in their game against the Chiefs. Like, he was the only thing that was working, and unfortunately it didn't work out for him just because of the mistakes that he was also making. But in terms of moving the ball offensively, it was Zay Flowers. They didn't even throw the ball to any other wide receivers on that team. It was the Zay Flowers show. So I think that he can take over this offense entirely. Another year in the Todd Monken system. I'm not fading this Ravens offense whatsoever. Like, I think this passing game still has room to grow. We don't know what they're going to do with their backfield. It seems like no one ever knows what they're going to do in their backfield, but I do know one thing. I want to be in on the Jackson Flowers connection in 2024.
I think so too. And listen, it's really difficult for me because I have so much JSN and so much Zay Flowers in my dynasty leagues. I can't say, it's like it's a Sophie's choice. I can't tell you which one I'd rather kill. I can't do it. Not kill, but let to be killed. The last thing I want to bring up here, Darren Waller. Normally I would stay away from him, but the fact of what he has been able to show us, Andrew, even in his short time in New York, my God, you're looking at him as the tight end 18 in the early 11th round of tight end premium drafts. Okay, like you don't even really have to draft him as a starter anymore. You can draft him as a backup. To me, I'm a sucker for it. I'm going to do it, but I'm a weak man, right? So I'm going to draft Darren Waller as my backup tight end. Are you going to draft Darren Waller as a backup tight end in a tight end premium league, given the fact that you can get him for an 11th round pick, early 11th round, after 17 tight ends are off the board? This is painful for you. I understand. We're going to have to open up the wound here. Go ahead.
See, this is the perfect strategy, right? The bridge to TJ Hawkinson is Darren Waller. It's the wall to TJ Hawkinson. This is the strategy you implement. You draft Darren Waller in the 11th round or whatever as your third tight end. Look, again, we all know what the spiel with Waller is. He's always hurt. But when he was healthy last year, he was number one among tight ends in weighted opportunity. So just like considering the target share he was seeing, considering the air yards that he was seeing in the Giants passing game with whoever they quarterback at that time, maybe it was Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor, some combination of them, not Tommy DeVito, not Tommy Cutlets. But yeah, at a point, he's too cheap at this point. And I think that's such something that you have to go through exercise in your mind. And this is what I keep thinking about, how you could avoid missing on a guy like Mike Evans last year, where I think that Mike Evans should have been, penalized. We didn't know what Baker Mayfield was going to be like. He was losing Tom Brady. It's like, this guy's going to be worse. Of course he's going to be worse. But there has to become a point in the draft where it's like, well, now it's less about he's already so discounted, but now it's like, well, he's Mike Evans at the end of the day still. Like he wakes up and gets 1,000 receiving yards. Like that's worth something. And Baker Mayfield was good at one point. So I think that with some of these players that are looked at negatively for the right reasons, you have to ask yourself, okay, like, yes, I know this player's in a bad situation, but like, where would I actually draft them? Where do they actually have to fall? And be real with yourself. And tight end 18 for me, I can be real with myself and say, you know what? I can take Darren Waller as tight end 18.
For context sake, in the FFPC number 2 early best ball tournament, which you can register for now at myffpc.com. These are some of the tight ends going ahead of Darren Waller. You're looking at Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave, Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet, Dallas Goedert, who quite frankly I think is going too low, Jake Ferguson, Kyle Pitts, and TJ Hawkinson, who has a non-zero chance of not playing this year. I know we talked about the positives about him this year at the top of the show, but the fact is, if he's slow to recover, if the Vikings are sucking, he may not play this year. Not saying that's likely. I'm just saying there's a non-zero chance of it. These are all players that are going ahead of Waller. You can get Waller in the early 11th. To my knowledge, after he broke onto the scene, this is the lowest he's ever gone. If you take one thing away from the show tonight, don't let it be Darren Waller in the early 11th as a target. But understand that if there's two things you take away from the show tonight, that's where he's going in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. We have much more takeaways from the show tonight. We've only scraped the surface on the fantasy football forecast posted on fantasypros.com. Andrew Erickson is the author of that, at Andrew Erickson _ on the X machine. Andrew Erickson, one of the scribes for fantasypros.com, fantasy football analyst there. Let's talk about the AFC when we come back. I want to get into Breece Hall. I want to get into the Chargers running back situation. That might be a short conversation. But I want to talk Devontae Adams. I want to talk Tank Dell as well. That is all coming up in the final segment of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, exclusively on the Better Sports Network. Andrew Erickson, I'm Eric Balkman. High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on right after this.
From the Hometown Hero series, Zach Parise.
That is a very nice card, and that's one I'm probably have to organize a little trade ski with you, because I would actually like that card.
You got downtown Newark in the background. I mean, Newark has never looked so good.
No, it is not.
We'll put that back up on the screen. I just want to have a penny sleeve ready, and yes, we can absolutely work out a little trade ski for that, because that belongs in a Devil fans collection right there.
I'll trade you the Braden Schneider rookie card for it.
Done.
There we go. The first card for card trade on Rip and Rip history. It was that easy.
It was that easy. That's because, you know why? Because neither one of us are jerks. And it's the same thing when we try and do fantasy trades. Like, we don't try and screw each other. We have conversations. If there's a fit, there's a fit. If it's not, it's not. We don't try and, like, take the other one over the barrel. So there you go. In a penny sleeve. Hometown hero, Zach Parise. He was among the league's most productive goal scorers in 06-07 and followed up with a terrific regular season with an even more impressive postseason. And then they talk about what he did in the first round series against Tampa Bay that year. So that's off to the side for you.
That's true. And, if this is it for his career, he had a hell of a career.
He did.
Hopefully he comes back one more year with the Islanders, but if he doesn't, hell of a run.
Welcome back to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. 21 minutes left in the program tonight. Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros. Hey, how are you? I'm Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Want to remind you that you can get the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription right now. Unlock all content for all sports, including annual draft guides, one-on-one expert access in Discord. You can sync your league to get analyzed matchups in your league and trends going forward in your league's lineup generator will be integrated with Fanjections as well. You'll get daily rankings, weekly rankings, the value vault position coaches, waiver wire, ownership percentages, projection stats and tools, build better lineups guaranteed. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers all year. Use promo code LOCK at fantasyalarm.com/lock. That is LOCK, fantasyalarm.com/lock. Oftentimes, Andrew, I bring I bring analysts onto the show, and they are kind of in hibernation mode. And I looked at what you're putting out at Andrew Erickson _ at fantasypros.com. My God, there's no off season for you. You just keep churning out the content.
Yeah, because I don't watch other sports really. I don't really do much else except football. That is my one true love. Don't tell my fiance. Don't tell her that. But my one true love is obviously football. But yeah, I mean, we try to stay ahead of the game, when it comes to 2024 early rankings. And I think that it kind of helps me set the foundation for the rest of the offseason. It's like you set the rankings like very loosely because, again, things are going to change all over the place. But having an idea of where I'm thinking these players are going to be drafted, where their ADPs are going to be, when drafts already come. And it's interesting when you bring up throughout the show, like these different ADPs for some of these early best ball drafts. And it's just nice to have a frame of reference where I'm like, oh, like, am I with the early market? Am I against the early market? Because I already have rankings set in place. So it's like, I like having that reference point to look back and be like, oh, I'm right consensus with what the early drafters are doing. It's like, oh, where are the guys that I'm way ahead of market on or way below? Am I missing something or are they missing something? So I think it's a really productive way to approach the offseason.
I think it is, and that's the way to do it. And like, quite frankly, like, there is no off season for you. There is no off season for Fantasy Pros. There's no off season for FFPC. You got Derek Brown and Thor Nystrom probably pounding old fashions or whatever they drink in. Where is it? Mobile? Is it Mobile? Is that where it is? Senior Bowl, Mobile? Yeah, I don't know what they drink down there. Like Southern Comfort, probably. I have no idea. So they're pounding that. They're gonna hit their Belgian waffles at Waffle House tomorrow, and then they're gonna go out to watch Senior Bowl practice day 3 or day 2, whatever it is right now. I think what's interesting here is, I don't like to be hyperbolic, but for like the last, I don't know, better part of a decade, fantasy football has been kind of year round, man. Like for analysts, for players, like we've had with the FFPC, we've had drafts going off for the following year prior to the divisional playoff. And if you're having drafts prior to the divisional playoff, like there is no off season. We got our FFPC postseason contest going on after the Super Bowl. We're going to award a player with $500,000. We're going to award multiple players with six-figure grand prizes. There is no off season anymore with fantasy football, and I think better, you guys at Fantasy Pros understand that better than anybody else. There is always constant movement. How much time have we spent talking about coaches and offensive coordinators and how this is going to affect fantasy drafts? We haven't even gotten to free agency of the draft yet. There is no quit, and there's no quit in you, my friend.
No, there is no rest. No rest at all.
No rest at all for you, but everybody who's hearing you say this is like, oh God, I got to check out Andrew Erickson _ X and check out everything is churning out at fantasypros.com. Let's talk about James Cook here. James Cook is a guy that really came on at the end of this past season, a guy that was basically a borderline running back one towards the end of the season. And quite frankly, with Joe Brady taking over full-time officially now, I think this is wheels up for James Cook. I know he is not coming at a massive discount, but man, 408 in the Never Too Early FFPC tournament. James Cook as the running back 11. I can definitely get on board. You could start off your draft with 3 straight receivers or 2 receivers and a tight end and get James Cook as your number 1 in the mid-4th round. I think that's a good way to start a draft, Andrew.
Yeah, I think James Cook is really interesting because he's a player that you're trying to bet on him coming on the positive side of this touchdown variance that we've talked about a lot throughout the show. Look, until Josh Allen stops scoring touchdowns, like it's going to be tough for James Cook to crack the league winner top 5 area at running back. It's just the way the math works out. But we don't know. Like things happen. Like quarterbacks sometimes stop rushing as much. And then what do you know? The touchdowns go to other players on the offense. So again, if Diggs isn't scoring a lot of touchdowns, it could be the James Cook show. And don't forget, Latavius Murray, he's a free agent. And Latavius Murray up there in terms of carries inside the 5-yard line. Trust me, I bet enough anytime touchdown Latavius Murray's to realize that he had a lot of red zone opportunities that never friggin' scored on. So if those touches go to James Cook, then you're seeing, okay, instead of 3 touchdowns or 4 touchdowns, now he's closer to 8, 9, 10 in a good offense. Okay, now we're cooking with gas. So I think you're getting him really closer to his floor under this Joe Brady offense where he was averaging 20 touches per game under Joe Brady. RB11, I think, is a floor draft spot for James.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, okay, Josh Allen still scores all the touchdowns, but Cook is efficient. He catches passes out of the backfield. So you feel good about that. Just the touchdowns out of the question mark. But like we said, touchdowns are the hardest thing to project. So if everybody thinks he's not going to score, that's what I want to take advantage of. Be like, you know what? I think that this is there. He is going to score the touchdown because I think he's good enough. So I'll buy James Cook at RB11.
There's another thing to point out, and I think you kind of touched on this. Stephon Diggs is currently not in a great situation with Josh Allen and Joe Brady in that Bills offense. Gabe Davis is a free agent. Dalton Kincaid really came on, so I think there's somebody said for that. But the rest of the Bills offense is such a quasi-unknown, and we know what James Cook did with Joe Brady. To me, and again, I don't want to just have you say the same thing over again. You can get James Cook in the mid to late 4th round on that Bills offense, which has been crushing it the last few years, especially this past year on the running game. Man, sign me up for that. I think that's a fantastic buy.
Yeah. Look, it's always better to just buy the offenses that you at least know are going to score touchdowns at all, and then just hope it goes to your guy versus, will this guy score touchdowns on this offense? Like, will this offense score touchdowns? So we know the Bills are going to score. So you just got to cross your fingers that James Cook gets a little bit more usage in that red zone versus Josh Allen.
Well, an old high-stakes fantasy football story from, this is like way back in the day prior to the FFPC, when myself and the FFPC co-founder, Dave the Dizzle Gerzak, we were playing all these other high-stakes events, and we would hang out with these high-stakes players. And one of the guys, this is an OG of the FFPC, Joe Del Zanero. He doesn't watch these shows, but he is like the Yogi Berra of fantasy football. And he lives in Chicago, and we've dined at his restaurant before. He's such a great guy. And we have talked fantasy football with this guy over the years. And there was a conversation we had with him way back in the day about Clinton Portis. This is when Portis was coming off a big year, but the big year was propped up by a massive reception and yardage score, but very rarely on touchdowns, right? Which are fluky. I get it. But we were talking about Clinton Portis and talking about drafting him with the top 4 pick in the draft. And, you know, myself and the Dizzle were kind of going back and forth. And finally, Baker Boy, that's Joe Del Zanero, Baker Boy says, you know what, guys? He plays on an offense that just doesn't score touchdowns. I don't want to draft players on teams that don't score touchdowns, which is true. Like, and I don't know how much this applies to James Cook, but I think that's something to keep in mind. I know they're not sticky. I know they're fluky. But if you are soaking that kind of draft capital on a player who is playing on a team that doesn't score a lot of touchdowns, I think you got to understand that you are playing with fire here. which is one of the many things I've learned from Baker Boy over the years. Besides the point, stay in the same division. Breece Hall, New York Jets. This is a player, Andrew, that if he wouldn't have torn his ACL, there is more than a non-zero chance that he would have been the de facto 101 pick in 2023 drafts. He tore his ACL. He wasn't the 101 pick, but he showed a lot on a bad team this past year. Breece Hall is currently going as the running back 2 at the 107. Are you all over that? Are you kind of saying, maybe I'll pick and, henpeck it like every so often I'll draft him there? Or are you avoiding it altogether? How do you feel about Breece Hall going forward in 2024 drafts?
I think it's right. And honestly, I mean, depending on how things ultimately shake out, I get Mike McCaffrey's the number one guy, but track record of players coming off the touch season that McCaffrey's going to be coming off of are not good. So, yeah, I'm buying Breece Hall. Again, we talked about you don't want to draft players that don't score a lot of touchdowns. I expect the Jets to score more touchdowns just by natural regression because they scored 18 last year, like basically less than one per game, essentially. That's going to change with Rodgers. So I think that buying Breece Hall, even as the RB2, look, this guy had 39 touches in his last game against my Patriots. 39 touches for 190 yards. Like, he is a monster. He was second among all running backs in yards from scrimmage. Basically, he checked off every single box of production you could ask for a running back besides touchdowns. And I just think that he's going to fall into more of a favorable situation with touchdowns with Rodgers coming back. And just in general, like, they're going to have a better plan. Again, I don't think they can enter this offseason with, okay, Rodgers going to be our quarterback, and then we're going to do nothing at backup. It's like, no, like, they're going to be ready. I think they're going to be ready across the board. Like, we cannot let what happened last year happen again if Rodgers gets hurt. Again, the offensive line. This is a big issue. Like, that was the concern about Jets players last year. Was like, oh, what about the offensive line? Like, how's it going to do? And what do you know? It took like 8 snaps for the offensive line to get exposed. So I don't think it's out of this range to say Breece Hall should be the RB2. I think that's correct. That's where I have him ranked. And, it's funny that you mentioned Breece Hall as the 101. He could have been last year. When I was ranking players for last year's draft, I was trying to think, okay, who could be next year's 101? That was not named Christian McCaffrey or one of these receivers. And the two guys that were always, to me, that could be the next 101 would have been Bijan and Breece Hall. Those have been the top two guys. Yeah. So I think that it's right with Breece Hall. A healthy Breece Hall, I think he should be up here. And I think if things shake out in a certain way with the Jets offense, it would not surprise me if he finishes the first running back overall.
What about, and this is the concern I had with Breece Hall. Trevor Siemian checked down to him so much those last few weeks, and we always remember we have recency bias. He checked down so much to Breece Hall at the end of the season, and Breece Hall's fantasy production was obviously heightened in full PPR leagues by catching all those passes, 12 catches, 14 catches, what have you. Aaron Rodgers is not going to do that this coming year. Are you of the belief that the fact that Rodgers will not check down as much as Siemian did being at least met or superseded by the fact that Rodgers is a much better quarterback and the Jets offense is going to be that much better, that Breece Hall, regardless of the checkdowns, should be that high in drafts because he's still going to find ways to score fantasy points?
Yeah, I'm not too worried about because I think that the efficiency is going to be such a major boost for Breece Hall. I mean, when you look at his rushing last year, he was horrible. He was second to last among all running backs in rushing success rate. And yet he still finished with the second most yards from scrimmage. Like, I think that, yes, any volume that he loses in receptions and targets, sure. But it's not like we've seen Rodgers not rely on a running back, Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones had plenty of top 5 seasons because he scored a bunch of touchdowns. Maybe didn't see league-leading reception totals. But who else are they throwing the ball to in New York anyway? You got Garrett Wilson? Are they going to throw the ball to Allen Lazard this year? I don't know. So I think we should be buying Breece Hall. And I think that maybe this is where you talk about, who are we going to draft number 1 overall in 2025? I think it's going to be Breece Hall.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And by the way, I'm totally down for that. We got to go rapid fire on these last few topics. There's so much I want to hit on. Joe Mixon, let's talk about him briefly. Running back 21 at the 6'12", This is in the Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, James Conner, David Montgomery territory, Andrew. If you're drafting right now, how do you handle Mixon? Because I think that he could be a massive win. He could be a significant loss at the end of the 6th round if he does move on and he's on the team other than the Bengals in 2024.
Yeah, he's tough because I don't know what his outlook is going to be. Like, he's a really big salary cap hit. They have it out in his contract, so he may not be back on the Bengals next year. They like what they saw with Chase Brown or some of these other guys. So I think that RB2 price tag is probably fair for him, given his range of outcomes. If he comes back, if he ends up on a new team, but he's an older running back, so you don't think that he can do a lot. Like, he's very situation based, like, which is the issue. So he could tank. So I still think that, again, if you're trying to come in first place, what if he ends up on Dallas? He's Dallas' starting running back. Like,
that's a good point.
That's the sweet spot for any of these free agent running backs. Like, even if it's Tony Pollard coming back to Dallas, because he's a free agent too. Like, we talked about Derrick Henry earlier. Derrick Henry's on the Dallas Cowboys. Oh my God. Like, he's going to score a touchdown. So, like, that's going to happen. So I think that it's good to sprinkle, if you're doing volume drafting, to sprinkle in, because you're going to get some closing line value with Mixon potentially. But at the same time, like, he could end up going the Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook route where you just fade into oblivion. Like, that happens. And maybe that's more of a guy we're going to talk about next with Austin Eckler as a player that's like, he's probably more of the next Dalvin Cook potentially.
Okay, so that's a good point. Is Eckler is running back 24 right now, 7-11. To me, I'm staying with, there's no reason to draft him there. Chargers running back for 2024, not on the roster right now, right?
Yeah, it's good because it's gonna be Blake Corum.
Oh yeah, for Michigan, yeah. Like, and that's what could make this rookie draft crazy. Is if we talk about like Dallas, what if they don't sign a free agent, and what if they let Pollard go, and what if they get somebody? Tennessee, what if they soak a high running back pick, and Tyjae Spears is in the same role this coming year?
Something that's interesting just kind of popped in my head. Tony Pollard, right? Really disappointing year in Dallas. What if Tony Pollard reunites with Kellen Moore in Philadelphia?
Oh, and Swift moves on. My God, we cannot bring this stuff up 2 minutes before we got to go off air. That is fantastic. Okay, let's talk about one last thing. I think that's all we have time for. Tank Dell versus Nico Collins in 2024 drafts. Nico Collins, wide receiver 12 at the 211. Tank Dell, wide receiver 21 at the 402. I know there's a disparity about round and a half between those two. Which one is more likely to end up on your team in 2024, Andrew?
Tank Dell, 100%.
100%. Because of the draft value, or because he's going to have a better season than Collins?
I mean, I think the value is clearly with Tank Dell, and I think Nico Collins is just, look, I'm afraid that it's a one-year wonder type of thing where, I mean, he's been quiet for 2 years and then just suddenly blows up. I get CJ Stroud was a big part of that, but when they played together 8 games, their fantasy points per game was the same, like exactly the same. Like, and when you just look at a lot of Collins, like advanced metrics, it's like the dude just ripped off a lot of yards after the catch plays, like a ton of them. And it's just, it reminds me a lot of Deebo Samuel, where some of that stuff is going to regress. Like Deebo Samuel, that year that we all said everyone to fade him, it's because he scored a bunch of like 70-yard touchdowns.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Nico Collins did a lot of this past year.
I want to go 4 hours with you. We can't. It's the constraints that we have. I don't want to take up your time. Andrew Erickson, at Andrew Erickson _ on the X, fantasypros.com. Where else can we consume your content?
Yeah, fantasypros.com. You can find all my fantasy rankings there. And then for the betting side of things, I'm also on bettingpros.com. Betting Pros has an app. You can follow all my picks there for the Super Bowl, for futures, for NFL draft props. It's going to be a ton of fun. So go check me out there as well, bettingpros.com and fantasypros.com.
Andrew, I can't thank you enough for hopping aboard tonight. I've been entertained. I have been educated. I love it. We'll be back on this show next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. MyFFPC.com for Dynasty Orphans. MyFFPC.com for both the Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments we have going on. Numerous squads in the Dynasty Orphans have been lured, some as low as $1. Check them out. MyFFPC.com. The best of the Better Sports Network is up next. Thanks to Tyler Soto. Thanks to Andrew Erickson. I'm Eric Balkman. We'll see you next week.